We were saying how very important it is to bring about in the human mind the radical revolution. The crisis is a crisis in consciousness, a crisis that cannot anymore accept the old norms, the old patterns, the ancient traditions. And considering what the world is now, with all the misery, conflict, destructive brutality, aggression, and so on, man is still as he was. He's still brutal, violent, aggressive, acquisitive, competitive, and he has built a society along these lines.
Understand freedom anymore. We are a country that is headed towards socialism, totalitarianism, beyond your wildest imagination. I have to tell you, I'm doing a story tonight that I wanted to debunk these Fema camps. I'm tired of hearing. You know about them? Sure. I'm tired of hearing. I wanted to debunk them. Well, we've now for several days done research on them. I can't debunk them. And we're going to carry the story tonight. I don't know anything about them. So. It is...
From Arizona, the story is military-industrial complex prepares mass graves for U.S. citizens. We're getting all these emails pouring in from around the country saying, hey, they've got these in my town, Abilene, and other areas. And it goes with all the plastic FEMA coffins, other reports.
He's doing, patrolling in the United States, gets to a real heart of the matter, which is, do we have a democracy here? I mean, there is a law in the books called the Posse Comitatus Act.
It looked like a riot. Seen it.
Demand back.
You're apoplectic. I can't even say it.
But how does this relate?
He's apocalyptic, too.
How does that relate to the FEMA trailers?
Okay, so the FEMA, they're not FEMA trailers, FEMA prisons, FEMA camps. These are actual prisons that were built under the Bush administration, and they were built specifically for a couple of reasons. One was for a massive influx of illegal immigrants that we would have to jail. Now they're sitting there empty. If you got a problem.
We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded.
They're going to release a third out of the prisons.
Yet another reason to open my business in California.
And these camps are all over the U.S.?
Yes.
And they're all empty?
Yeah. Yeah. And they're all, and look, here's the thing.
That's what you're talking about tonight.
You'll see that tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, and intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
America, land of the free. Now that land is being slowly and systematically stripped of the freedoms our founding forefathers established for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Country or the conflict or the place that will define the Obama administration, what would it be?
I think his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created.
A global cartel of elitists are secretly pushing an ominous agenda of global government. But in order for their diabolical plans to be achieved, you and every American must submit to their oppressive form of tyranny. Those who will not give in will be brought into the submission of global governments. Through overwhelming force by the police state and the military monster created by Congress and the presidential puppets through the successive erosion of our Constitution and the establishment of Gestapo-type decrees in the form of so-called executive orders.
Hi. The film you are about to watch is about Fema and about the camps that are being spoken of in so many circles, on blogs, and even on YouTube. What are these camps about? And why would the government need them? Is there any truth to these camps? Most importantly, if there were camps, who would be put into them? I set out to see for myself exactly what these Fema camps were about. And here's what I found. In the Bible, there is a scenario where a one world order will come about in the last days, and it will be overseen by a ruler, the man of sin, or the Antichrist, as he's referred to in many circles. Now, he'll be able to subdue all the nations, and he'll come under, all these nations will come under his authority. It says in the Bible, all nations, languages, tongues, and people will obey him, and those who will not, of course, will be will perish. Their heads will be cut off. Tragic things. But in order for him to really take control, he will think to change times and laws. And this is written in Daniel. Now, the other thing too is that he will have power to actually subtly deceive all these nations into believing that he can actually bring peace by uniting all the nations under one banner. and thereby eliminating war, famine, disease, you know, all the setbacks of humanity. Of course, there are voluminous books on the New World Order. There's lots of documentaries exposing their agenda, and there's so much to the agenda that if I was to try to explain it all in one movie, my movie would be never ending, you know. So the purpose of my film will be to set out to show you the basic history and development of FEMA and the global conspiracy in general, and give you ample reason for believing the truth behind these FEMA camps. And that's my objective. The thing about this documentary is, while you watch this film, those of you in this watching the film, I want you to keep in mind and ask yourself, why haven't you heard these things on your local TV, on your local news? Why haven't you read these things in your local papers? You might have, but in small increments and with a lot of misinformation. I love my country, and I felt an obligation to pull all of the information together into one film so that this evil can basically be exposed and possibly averted. The time is short, however, very short. We are coming to a close, to a head with this New World Order, and there's much to do if we are to stop the advent of the New World Order from taking place, in which 80% or more of the population will be destroyed so that a few elite may have the world to themselves, and with the remaining 500 million as slave labor in basic terms. So, for those of you who don't care, you can turn the film off right now, and you can go accept your RFID chips, and you can go and live with the rest who don't care in your basically contained cities with the police state, guarding your and watching your every move. But my hope is that you will listen, and not only that, but you'll take this information and become active yourself, morally and legally, because we need a lot of help. At the end of my film, you will see some groups and some ways that you can become a solution to this problem. And it's my hope that you will also pray to the Almighty for the strength, the wisdom, and the knowledge to do so. Thank you.
Only honor is atrocity.
And global
and then after that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
there were too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But they don't get global warming and the nuclear weapons straightened out. We don't have to worry about human rights. The humans will all be gone. You know.
Okay. Do you think
Barack Obama defended infanticide, the killing of fully born infants who had survived a failed abortion attempt and were then left for hours in soiled linen baskets to die? Jill Stanek and others blew the whistle on this. There was a bipartisan majority.
Eugenics dominated the 20th century. Its ruthless spirit has now metastasized into the fields of genetics, nanotech, and robotics. But that's not surprising. From their inception, all three disciplines have been dominated by eugenicists. The billionaire founder of Sun Microsystems, Bill Jordan, courageously went public in 2000 to warn of a cancerous consensus among the technocratic elite that at best humanity would be completely enslaved by the year 2030, and at worst, mass extermination of everyone but the elite would take place.
So what we have is currently 6.5 billion people in the world. And statistics show that by 2050, we'll have around 9.5 billion people. Well, this is a lot of consumption and so on. With these elitists, they don't like this. They want to downsize the population, believe it or not, to 1/2 billion people. So what is that? 6 billion people would have to be exterminated. Several programs already to keep control of the population. In the 60s, they had an offensive biological weapons program that supposedly in 1969 was eradicated, but it wasn't. It kept going, and they developed a lot of viruses, a lot of cancers, and even it's even reported that AIDS was developed at that time. And this stuff is spread out into these third world countries in order to downsize the undesirables, so to speak. And these elitists who think they're better than everyone else thinks that you don't deserve to eat their food, breathe their air, live on their land, and they want control of it all. The rest are going to put into contained cities through Agenda 21. Codex Alimentarius is another program to devaluate the, basically the value of food so that you get no nutrition. But, secretly, there was a secret meeting on May 26th of 2009 where a group of people got together. It was Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, George Soros, Warren Buffett, Michael Bloomberg. They all got together, basically, and discussed global population. And they met at the house of Sir Paul Nurse, who is a British Nobel Prize winner, and also, incidentally, president of Rockefeller University, of all things. And but like I said, they got together to discuss global population as if they had nothing better to do. And during that meeting, they each got a turn to talk for 15 minutes about their cause, their favorite cause. Of course, they all kind of surrounded Bill Gates on, they wanted to basically come together on something they could all agree upon as their #1 cause, and Bill Gates kind of brought forth global population, the problem of it, and capping global population down to 8.3 billion, according to the current statistics at that time, and so now they all decided that they were going to meet over the next few months, periodically to continue studying on and discussing this global population problem. And what happened is at this meeting, according to Washington Times, they felt that global population was, potentially a disastrous environmental issue, social issue, industrial threat type thing. So, quote, one of the papers here says, this is something so nightmarish that everyone in this group agreed it needs big brain answers. Code word for Big Brother answers, by the way. And they said they need to be independent of government agencies which are unable to head off the disaster we all see looming. Folks, what that really means is they wanted to be kept away from independent governments, borders and things. They want a one-world government. They don't want sovereignty because they know that sovereign nations will not follow this agenda. People who have a constitution will not follow this agenda. Okay, these people are not playing. They want to downsize the population 95%. They're getting together. They've got the money. They've got the resources. Okay, they can put this thing together. There's a like you said, Agenda 21, I'm going to show you, is very serious, it's very imminent.
Society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Any group of farmers who permitted their best stock not to breed and let all the increase come from the worst stock would be treated as fit inmates for an asylum. Someday we will realize that the prime duty, the inescapable duty of good citizens of the right type, is to leave his or her blood behind in the world, and that we have no business to permit the perpetuation of citizens of the wrong type. The great problem of civilization is to secure a relative increase of the valuable as compared with the less valuable or noxious elements of the population. The problem cannot be met unless we give full consideration to the immense influence of heredity. I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding, and when the evil nature of these people is sufficiently flagrant, this should be done. Criminals should be sterilized and feeble-minded persons forbidden to leave offspring behind them. The emphasis should be on getting desirable people to breed. Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the U.S. Political unification in some sort of world government will be required, even though any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible. It will be important for UNESCO to see the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake so that much that now is unthinkable may at least become thinkable. Julian Huxley, UNESCO, Its Purpose and Philosophy, 1946. I do not pretend that birth control is the only way in which the population can be kept from increasing. War has hitherto been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of that? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's. There are three ways of securing a society that shall be stable as regards population. The first is that of birth control, the second that of infanticide or really destructive wars, and the third that of general misery except for a powerful minority. Bertrand Russell, philosopher. The Impact of Science on Society, 1957. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would be possible to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist and for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. It would probably be possible to make a new infective microorganism which could differ in certain important respects from any known disease-causing organisms. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological and therapeutic process upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease. U.S. Congress testimony given before a subcommittee, 1969. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. David Rockefeller, New York Times, 1973. The Georgia Guidestones are a huge granite monument in Elbert County, Georgia, USA. A unique message comprising 10 guides is inscribed on the structure in 8 modern languages, and a shorter message is inscribed at the top of the structure in 4 ancient language scripts: Babylonian, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. The monument is almost 20 feet tall and made from 6 granite slabs weighing more than 240,000 pounds in all. In June 1979, a person under the pseudonym R.C. Christian hired Elberton Granite Finishing Company to build this structure. Jay Widener, who is a former radio commentator, has forwarded the popular hypothesis that the author's pseudonym may be a tribute to the legendary 14th century founder of Rosicrucianism, Christian Rosencreuz. At the top of the monument, 10 guides are written. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule, passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights and social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. So, if you notice that first part, it says, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. That's what I'm talking about. Reducing the population to 500 million people. The next part of it says, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. This is the eugenics program. This is how Margaret Sanger got started with Planned Parenthood later. It changed over from eugenics into bioethics and Planned Parenthood, showing how we have to be wise with reproduction. China's already doing, one person, a child per family. There's another place down here that said, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. That's called the International Criminal Court, folks, and they want you, and want the United States to become a part of that so that we can be tried under international law for the UN, okay? So that we can take away, they can basically take away the sovereignty of the United States. This is all a part of this plan to push us in this world government. And these FEMA camps will be, there will be a reason for these. I'll show you why. There's going to be some resistance. And the last part of that one, it said, be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature, leave room for nature. Well, obviously, folks, through these biospheres that you're going to hear about, through the Agenda 21 with the UN, they're leaving plenty of room for nature. And they're not going to leave any room for humanity. So as you watch these portions coming up in the film, listen and pay attention to what they're saying. Their whole agenda is to push you off your own land, categorize you in these little areas of cities that are highly contained, highly controlled by the police state, and resistors. Of course, they have a convenient place called the FEMA detention facilities where you will be disciplined or exterminated, one of the two. So pay attention to the rest of this film. Be thinking about the things that you've seen so far, because this all is going to happen very soon, and we have to be ready, and we have to fight this thing. You guys have to fight it, I'm telling you.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. In the same period, the world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. This is a development which, as individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming rapid, growing exploitation of the world's supply of energy and water is a matter of deep concern, and the toxic byproducts of widespread industrialization have increased atmospheric pollution to dangerous levels. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic coordination. Unrestrained economic growth poses further threats to our environment. This was a major subject of discussion at the conference in Rio de Janeiro on the environment 2 years ago. The focus then was on sustainable growth and global development. It was pointed out at the conference that growth is most efficiently managed by the private sector, but regulation of the process by national governments and international bodies is also needed. And once again, the United Nations should certainly be among the catalysts and coordinators of this process.
Today is May 1st, 1992. The subject of this video message is the UNCED Earth Summit, the meeting which is to begin on June 1st, 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. The acronym UNCED stands for the United Nations Committee for Environment and Development. It is pronounced UNCED. Maurice Strong has suggested an ominous scenario at the UNCED meeting, which could break out if his words are to be believed. He says in this article in West magazine that a fight may erupt between the first world polluters and the third world poor. Here is how he describes it. Each year, he explains as background to the telling of his novel's plot, the World Economic Forum convenes in Davos, Switzerland. Over 1,000 CEOs, prime ministers, finance ministers, and leading academics gather in February to attend meetings and set economic agendas for the year ahead. With this as a setting, Maurice Strong then says, what if a small group of these world leaders were to conclude that the principal risk to the earth comes from the actions of the rich countries? And if the world is to survive, those rich countries would have to sign an agreement reducing their impact on the environment. Will they do it? He's really talking about the UNCED meeting. And Strong, driving as I take notes, looks at me. Then his eyes go back to Highway 17 on the way from Alamosa, Colorado to his New Age ranch in Crestone, Colorado. they agree to save the earth? Strong resumes his story. The group's conclusion is no. The rich countries won't do it. They won't change. So, in order to save the planet, the group decides, isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring this about? This group of world leaders, he continues, form a secret society to bring about an economic collapse. It's February. They're all at Davos. These aren't terrorists. They're world leaders. They have positioned themselves in the world's commodity and stock markets. They've engineered, using their access to stock exchanges and computers and gold supplies, a panic. Then, they prevent the world stock market from closing. They jam the gears. They hire mercenaries who hold the rest of the world leaders at Davos as hostages. The markets can't close. The rich countries, and Strong makes a slight motion with his fingers as if he were flicking a cigarette butt out the window. I sit there spellbound. This is not any storyteller talking. This is Maurice Strong. He knows these world leaders. He is, in fact, co-chairman of the Council of the World Economic Forum. He sits at the fulcrum of power. He is in a position to do it. I probably shouldn't be saying things like this, he says. Highway 17 cuts straight across the desert, heading out of the land of dreams. When the truth is finally told, Maurice Strong fears the world will come to this. No secret societies, no hostage takings at Davos, but it will come to the same conclusion. The global economy, sapped by credit and debt loads and environmental disasters, will simply come unstuck.
The problem is the monopoly game, which is controlled by the Federal Reserve, the private bank, which is actually controlled out of London, is manipulating all the dollars to put them out, put more and more people into debt. So the illusion of equity they have in real estate is coming apart. The players that are analyzing everything are expecting massive foreclosures next year and the beginning of what we call the recession it's going to be worse than 29. Take your house that you're living in. You think you own it. You don't.
Right.
You have contractual right to transfer the airspace, subject to you paying taxes to the state.
Right.
Or the Global 2000 discussions that we had. The real problem that they have, as Kissinger says, is there are just too many people on the planet. And 40% of the world, 2 billion of us, exist on less than $2 a day. The summary of the Global 2000 report I put up on my website, nohoax.com, but if you look at it, it makes sense to get rid of people. So what they said, they're going to make godlike decisions on who lives and who dies. Now, obviously...
One of the biggest threats to the sovereignty of the United States of America has to be the United Nations Agenda 21.
Declaro aberta a primeira participantes. Estou certo de que poderei contar com a cooperação de
a profoundly important human experience from which none of us can emerge unchanged. To Chairman, first of all, I would like to express my profound gratitude for the generous words of confidence and appreciation that have been extended to us here.
This cancer, Agenda 21, also known as Local Agenda 21 or LA 21, is nothing short of an attack on our country. It came to life in 1992 and is spreading across the globe with the help of anyone who happens to buy into the idea of a global threat. Its real purpose is hidden inside a cloaked presentation of environmental sustainability. However, it's about to control your life, your children's lives, and your children's children's lives into perpetuity. In 1991, Strong wrote the introduction to a book published by the Trilateral Commission called Beyond Interdependence, The Meshing of the World's Economy and the Earth's Ecology by Jim McNeil. David Rockefeller wrote the foreword. Strong said this interlocking is the new reality of the century. with profound implications for the shape of our institutions of governance, national and international. By the year 2012, these changes must be fully integrated into our economic and political life. He told the opening session of the Rio Conference in 1992 that industrialized countries have, quote, developed and benefited from the unsustainable patterns of production and consumption which have produced our present dilemma. It is clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. A shift is necessary toward lifestyles less geared to environmentally damaging consumption patterns.
I want to tell you about a few of the things that I have learned during these last 5 years of intensive research. Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published. The UN-funded Commission on Global Governance began meeting in 1992 in earnest and met for 4 years, and last fall released their final report. It is entitled Our Global Neighborhood. A few of the things that they wish to do: create a world standing army under the day-to-day command of, who else? The UN Secretary General. They recommend the creation of a new Economic Security Council, into which the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations Development Program, and the World Trade Organization would all be consolidated. A unified worldwide banking scheme, currency. I don't think I need to draw any more pictures on that point. Now, those non-government organizations like ours that are not accredited by the UN, we are called populist trash, activists, who can destroy, they say, in a moment, years of deliberation. And you're darn right. And I have been challenged on the radio and in audiences like this. Mr. Lamb, there's no such thing as a global agenda. Hey, friend, you're absolutely wrong. Here it is. It's called Agenda 21. Agenda 21. The primary document presented in Rio de Janeiro and adopted by more than 100 heads of state, including George Bush, which lays out in intricate detail all of the transformation that must take place in society in order for it to become sustainable as they define sustainability. This may be available at the United Nations bookstore. I had to pick this up. I had not seen one until last July, had not been able to get one. I happened to be in Geneva attending a United Nations meeting, and I went to the bookstore and bought the thing. I believe it cost $45. Now, the Conference of the Parties held its first meeting in Nassau last December. At that first meeting, the United Nations Environment Program presented a global biodiversity assessment. Started in 1992 with a grant from the Global Environment Facility for $3.3 million, orchestrated and coordinated by the World Resources Institute and the World Wildlife Fund and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. This is 1,140 pages that explains how to implement the 16-page treaty on biodiversity. The last 200 pages, section 13, deals specifically with a system of protected areas. It defines what a system of protected areas is. It includes core wilderness areas surrounded by buffer zones, similar to those used in the biosphere reserves, created under a UNESCO program and promoted by the United States Man in the Biosphere program. There are 382 biosphere reserves around the world, 47 of which are in the United States, not under authority of any treaty, but by voluntary agreement with the United Nations. These biosphere reserves are to be the nucleus for the core wilderness areas. Scratching my head here, what on earth is going on? And then I stumbled on page 993, and friends, if you don't think that's some heavy reading at night, page 993, after describing these protected areas, sums it all up by saying, the recently published Wildlands Project in the United States is the central theme of protected areas. And on page 15 of the Wildlands Project, Dr. Reed Noss says that we must convert at least 50% of the land area of North America to wilderness, off limits to human beings. Those core wilderness areas are to be interconnected by wilderness corridors off limits to human beings. Those wilderness areas are to be surrounded by buffer zones that may have limited resource use under the supervision and permitting of the federal government, in collaboration with non-government organizations. Human population is to be resettled into the remaining 25% of the land, into communities that are described as sustainable communities.
The document calls for literally reducing the human population by as much as 2/3 to 3/4 in the next 30 to 50 years. It could set aside up to 1/2 of the American landscape into wilderness areas interconnected by wilderness corridors, all surrounded by human buffer zones in which human activities are highly regulated. That is very, very clear in these United Nations documents that they want to set up a regulatory structure that would affect every man, woman, and child on planet Earth, and all of the control would be headquartered in the United Nations. And if we take the more recent United Nations documents, it's going to be called the Trusteeship Council in the restructure of the United Nations that's occurring right now. And the Man in the Biosphere program, as revealed in the U.S. State Department documents as well as UNESCO documents, clearly show that the Man in the Biosphere program actually is the first step in implementing the Convention on Biological Diversity. And there are 47 of these Man in the Biosphere programs around this nation that occupy about 51 million acres of U.S. soil.
World Heritage Sites are many of our national parks. In fact, 68% of our national parks land base is now under UNESCO's World Heritage Site. And that includes the symbol of independence in America, the Independence Hall, the Statue of Liberty, Yellowstone National Park, Monticello, Carlsbad Caverns, and the American people didn't even realize this was happening.
Sustainable development has become a popularized expression for Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is the 1992 United Nations Rio Declaration on the Environment and Development.
It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today. For a brave new world where everything that you cherished and held true will no longer exist.
Agenda 21 defines itself as the comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations systems.
It also elevates nature above man. And it contains something called the precautionary principle, where basically you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Sustainable development is the philosophy designed to bring human beings across the globe under the full control of a narrow human elite.
It's a 40-chapter document to basically control the world. It's based entirely on socialist control mechanisms.
Sustainable developers have designed a global movement coordinated through a global to local action plan to create world government in accordance with certain objectives. These objectives include an end to national sovereignty, the abolition of private property, the restructure of the family unit, and increasing limitations and restrictions on mobility and individual opportunity.
The green goal includes the listings of what's not sustainable. A couple of the examples include private property.
728 lists fossil fuels.
Golf courses and ski lodges are not.
Consumerism.
Irrigation is not sustainable.
Paved roads.
Commercial agriculture.
Herbicides, pesticides. Elsewhere, it lists farmlands, pastures, grazing of livestock.
And the family unit.
So maybe now you're starting to get the picture. Through this Agenda 21, they have a plan to do what? Reduce the population, like we were talking about, 500 down to 500 million, and at the same time take away sovereignty from these nations. Okay, you've got the International Monetary Fund, you've got the World Bank, which the UN is using. Okay, the guys behind this is this global warming scandal, okay, which says that human population productivity is causing these problems. And this is what they want you to believe. They want you to believe that you as a human being are causing your CO2 carbon emissions, your flatulence basically, is causing this problem. It's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. There are periods of global warming and global cooling. Global warming, global cooling. So they changed it to climate change now because they can't make up their minds. They know this, but what they're counting on is that you don't know this. And so they use this scandal of global warming combined with an economic crisis to cause these countries to fail. And when you're hungry, when you don't have food, when you don't have shelter and clothing, you'd be more willing to give up some of your sovereignty in order to be fed. And that's what they're counting on. Especially richer countries, like the gentleman said in this portion of the film where he says, hey, look, you know, the richer countries are less likely to give in, so we've got to create an economic crisis in order for them to fall in order to give into this new world order. Now, we also talked about these contained cities in Agenda 21, where they're using biospheres under the guise of global warming, I should say, in order to say, oh, we've got to save forest lands and we've got to save these marshlands and wastelands, whatever we want to call them. And so what they do is they take these and they cordon them off. They give voluntarily permission for the UN to control these areas, and that way humans are not allowed onto those lands. They're slowly doing this in order to push us slower and slower, but slowly through Fabian philosophy. Fabians were opposite of the communists, who believed that, the communists believed that we should, do this through force and violence, create this new world order. But the Fabians were more, like, no, let's do it in incrementalism. Let's do it a little bit here, a little bit there, slowly and subtly, so that the people don't realize that this socialism is falling upon them. So we are slowly falling into this. Okay, we're getting dangerously close. I mean, we've had the G20 meetings, like we said,
where they have gone and they've discussed giving IMF and World Bank the power to become, international Federal Reserve for the whole world. And our dollar is slowly falling from the marketplace. Germany is asking for its gold back. China is, has no more confidence in us. We've got to understand this, people. So the next portion I'm going to show you is about these contained cities. This is let's say a flagship for what's going to happen internationally here in the United States and in other European countries, in Asian countries, all over the world, okay? So pay attention because it's coming soon.
We urgently need to address the issues of global warming and pollution. Pressure on the world's finite natural resources continues to increase. The future for all of us will be governed by the development of clean technologies for sustainable environmental management. For almost half a century, Abu Dhabi has been a world leader in energy production. Now, the nation is keen to play its full part in the development and implementation of alternative sources of energy. The Masdar Initiative is the catalyst for fusing research and innovation from the best people in the world, from both academia and international corporations. The first stage of the development sets the tone for the whole project. The construction of a state-of-the-art photovoltaic power plant will deliver the energy required to build the rest of the new city. Masdar will be a compact, high-density city, completely free from cars and their emissions, a model of energy conservation with zero carbon emissions and zero waste. Compared to average urban levels, fossil fuel consumption will be zero on site. All waste production will be recycled, and consumption of desalinated water will be reduced by 80%. Cycling and walking will be the most popular means of travel. The master plan means no one will be further than 200 meters from essential facilities, including shops selling locally grown produce. A fully automated electric personal rapid transit system will provide a flexible and comfortable alternative to private cars. A light railway transport system will link the Masdar development with the center of Abu Dhabi, adjacent developments, and the international airport. The unique design of its walled city will show both energy and water conservation can be achieved whilst also greatly enhancing the quality of life. One day, all cities will be built like this.
Absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths. 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations, but the next 2 billion. They will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients. So we need your help, because the United States leadership is what's going to literally save the population of the planet.
The UN has put out dozens of public documents where they're calling for an 80% world population reduction. In fact, at the Beijing Women's Conference, the World Conference, back in 1997, the head of the UN Food Program said, "We will use food as a weapon."
Ladies and gentlemen,
we have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Yes, there have been differences between America and Europe. No doubt there will be differences in the future. But the burdens of global citizenship continue to bind us together. In this new century, Americans and Europeans alike will be required to do more, not less. Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice. It is the only way, the one way, to protect our common security.
The way we're going to win over the long term is not just militarily. We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like.
A special edition of NBC Nightly News. Terrorists declare war on the United States, hijacking jetliners, crashing them into New York's World Trade Towers. Another airliner into the Pentagon, threatening the seat of national power. Thousands likely dead. Downtown New York in chaos. America wondering what next?
At the locations where the 4 airliners hit. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, 20 minutes apart. Then, within an hour this morning, the Pentagon. And then, the final crash just minutes later, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, 266 people on the 4 airplanes alone, all presumed to be dead.
This is Aaron Russo, a filmmaker and former politician. To his left is Nicholas Rockefeller of the infamous Rockefeller banking and business dynasty. After maintaining a close friendship with Nicholas Rockefeller, Aaron eventually ended the relationship, appalled by what he had learned about the Rockefellers and their ambitions.
I got a call one day from an attorney woman I knew, and she said, "Would you like to meet one of the Rockefellers?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." And we became friends, and he began to divulge a lot of things to me. So he said to me one night, he said that there's going to be an event there, and out of that event, you're going to see we're going to go into Afghanistan, so we can run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We're going to go into Iraq to take the oil and establish a base in the Middle East, and we're going to go into Venezuela and try and get rid of Chavez. And the first two they've accomplished. Chavez they didn't accomplish. And he said you're going to see guys going into caves looking for looking for people that they're never going to find. You know, he was laughing about the fact that you have this war on terror. There's no real enemy. He's talking about how by having this war on terror, you can never win it because so it's an eternal war. And so you can always keep taking people's liberties away. And I said, how are you going to convince people that this war is real? He said, but the media can convince everybody it's real. I mean, you know, it's just that you keep talking about things. You keep saying it over and over and over again, and eventually people believe it. You know, you created the Federal Reserve in 1913 through lies. You create 9/11, which is another lie. Through 9/11, then you're fighting a war on terror, and now all of a sudden you go into Iraq, which was another lie, and now they're going to do Iran. You know, and it's all one thing leading to another, leading to another, leading to another. Now, I would say, what are you doing this for? What's the point of this thing? You have all the money in the world you ever want. You have all the power. I said, you know, you're hurting people. It's not a good thing. And he would say, what do you care about the people for? Take care of yourself and you take care of your family. And then I said to him, what are the ultimate goals here? He said, the ultimate goal is to get everybody in this world chipped with the RFID chip and have all money be on those chips and everything on those chips. And if anybody wants to protest what we do or violate what we want, we just turn off their chip.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Almost 7 years have passed since that September morning when nearly 3,000 men, women, and children were murdered in our midst. The most important lessons learned after 9/11 was that America's intelligence professionals lacked some of the tools they needed to monitor the communications of terrorists abroad. It's essential that our intelligence community know who our enemies are talking to, what they're saying, and what they're planning. Last year, Congress passed temporary legislation that helped our intelligence community monitor these communications. The legislation I'm signing today will ensure that our intelligence community professionals have the tools they need to protect our country in the years to come.
Students of history will remember that even in ancient Rome, the consuls who wanted to become emperors or dictators declared emergencies, and then they said, well, they were the emperor in charge of solving the problem. This new national security and homeland security directive, National Security Directive 51 and Homeland Security Directive 20, have no requirement to go to Congress and say nothing about how this directive complies with or supersedes the National Emergency Act requirements to notify Congress.
Some of the least noticed and least discussed changes in the law were the changes made to the Insurrection Act of 1807 and to Posse Comitatus by the Defense Authorization Act of 2007. These changes pose a threat to the survival of our republic by giving the president the power to declare martial law for as little reason as to restore public order. The 1807 Act severely restricted the president in his use of the military within the United States borders. And the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 strengthened these restrictions with strict oversight by Congress. The new law allows the president to circumvent the restrictions of both laws. The Insurrection Act has now become the, quote, Enforcement of the Laws to Restore Public Order Act, close quote. This is hardly a title that suggests that the authors cared about or understood the nature of a constitutional republic. Now, martial law can be declared not just for insurrection, but also for natural disasters, public health reasons, terrorist attacks or incidents, or for the vague reason called other conditions. The president can call up the National Guard without congressional approval or the governor's approval, and even send these state guard troops into other states. The American Republic is in remnant status. The stage is set for our country eventually devolving into a military dictatorship, and few seem to care.
If this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.
On Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a barely noticed development last week, the Army stationed an active unit inside the United States. The Infantry Division's 1st Brigade team is back from Iraq, now training for domestic operations under the control of U.S. Army North, the Army service component of Northern Command. The unit will serve as an on-call federal response for large-scale emergencies and disasters. It's being called the Consequence Management Response Force, CCMRF, or CSMRF for short. It's the first time an active unit has been given a dedicated assignment to U.S. NORTHCOM, which was itself formed in October 2002 to, quote, provide command and control of Department of Defense homeland defense efforts. An initial news report in the Army Times newspaper last month noted, in addition to emergency response, the force, quote, may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control. Well, I'm joined now by two guests. Army Colonel Michael Boatner is Future Operations Division Chief of U.S. NORTHCOM. He joins me on the phone from Colorado Springs. We're also joined from Madison, Wisconsin by journalist and editor of the Progressive magazine, Matthew Rothschild.
They ultimately have weapons, heavy weapons and combat vehicles and other service capability at their home station at Fort Stewart, Georgia, but they wouldn't bring that stuff with them. In fact, they're prohibited from bringing it. They would bring their individual weapons, which is the standard policy for deployments in the homeland. Those would be centralized and containerized, and they could only be issued to the soldiers with Secretary of Defense permission.
Matt Rothschild, you've been writing about this in the Progressive magazine. What is your concern?
Well, I'm very concerned on a number of fronts about this, Amy. One, that NORTHCOM, the Northern Command that came into being in October of 2002, when that came in, people like me were concerned that the Pentagon was going to use its forces here in the United States, and now it looks like, in fact, it is, even though on its website it says it doesn't have units of its own. Now it's getting a unit of its own. And Colonel Boatner talked about this unit, what it's trained for. Well, let's look at what it's trained for. This is the 3rd Infantry 1st Brigade Combat Unit that has spent 3 of the last 5 years in Iraq in counterinsurgency. It's a warfighting unit. It was one of the first units to Baghdad. It was involved in the Battle of Fallujah. And, you know, that's what they've been trained to do, and now they're bringing that training here. On top of that, one of the commanders of this unit was boasting in the Army Times about this new package of non-lethal weapons that has been designed, and this unit itself is going to be able to use, according to that original article. And, in fact, the commander was saying he'd even tasered himself and was boasting about tasering himself. So why is a Pentagon unit that's going to be possibly patrolling the streets of the United States involved in using tasers? We looked at National Security Presidential Directive 51 that he signed on May 9th of 2007, Amy. This gives the president enormous powers to declare a catastrophic emergency and to bypass our regular system of laws, essentially to impose a form of martial law. And if you look at that National Security Presidential Directive, what it says that in any incident where there is extraordinary disruption of a whole range of things, including our economy, the president can declare a catastrophic emergency. Well, we're having these huge disturbances in our economy. President Bush could today pick up that National Security Directive 51 and say, we're in a catastrophic emergency, I'm going to declare martial law, and I'm going to use this combat brigade to enforce it.
Jeff Stein, he is the national security editor of Congressional Quarterly, talking about Homeland Security. And he said safely tucked into the $526 billion defense bill, it easily crossed the goal line on the last day of September. The language doesn't just brush aside a liberal Democrat slated to take over the Judiciary Committee. This was a piece written last year. It runs over the backs of the governors, 22 of whom are Republican. The governors waved red flags about the measure on August 1st, 2007, sending letters of protest from their Washington office to the Republican chairs and ranking Democrats on the House and Senate Armed Services Committees. No response. So they petitioned the party heads on the Hill. The letter, signed by every member of the National Governors Association, said this provision was drafted without consultation or input from governors and represents an unprecedented shift in authority from governors to the federal government. Colonel Michael Boatner.
That's in the political arena. That has nothing to do with my responsibilities or what I'm was asked to talk about here with regard to supporting civil authority in the homeland.
Matthew Rothschild.
Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont was so concerned about that with Northcom and with perhaps this unit, and I want to call Senator Leahy's office today and ask him about this. You have the usurpation of the governor's role, of the National Guard's role, and it's given straight to the Pentagon in some of these instances, and that's very alarming. That was alarming to almost every governor, if not every governor in the country when Bush tried to do that end around about the Posse Comitatus Act. So I think these are real concerns.
Outrage tonight over an intelligence report. Critics say the Department of Homeland Security document unfairly paints military vets as right-wing extremists. And Maria Antonia is live now in the newsroom with some reaction. Maria?
Kelly, this is the 9-page report we're talking about. It is the topic that has prompted all kinds of reports, comments, and criticism online. And here in our area, this is the reason why upset veterans are calling the VFW. It's a report that went out to law enforcement warning about the potential of right-wing extremists using the country's bad economy and the election of the first black president among the reasons to recruit members.
2000, the war starting in the year 2000 in the Middle East.
Right.
Reduce the population of the planet down to 500 million, have one world currency under the Homeland Security, or FEMA if you want to call it. They're going to declare an emergency, which are going to shut down everything. My friends, my CIA associates, I don't even call them friends anymore. CIA is crooks in action.
Yeah.
They're all professional liars.
Yeah.
I mean, they got to be if they have that job.
Yeah.
So that you have to look at what they're doing. Anyway, they're so concerned they're leaving the country too. Most of them are going to Latin America. Meanwhile, they're closing in every day right now, just closing in to make it so we're going to be set up in these enemy prisoner war camps. I published a book. It's called Chaos in America.
Mm-hmm.
In it, I was asked to build an enemy prisoner war camp. I put the contract in this book, so you can read it for yourself. This is in downtown Las Vegas, right on the railroad tracks. It says enemy prisoner war camp. They're all on top. And they're building them all the way across the United States right now. Bush signed an executive order taking the old forts and the army places that we shut down to get those organized to hold the so-called dissidents. Now, what's the definition of a dissident? And the problem is that we're going to enslave ourselves because most of the people want to keep having food coming in, and you're going to follow the line. You're just rocking yourself into your own prison camp.
A national state of emergency can be declared by a concurrent resolution of both houses of Congress or by the President in the case of natural disasters, nuclear war, a massive mobilization in anticipation of an enemy attack on U.S. territory, or a domestic civil unrest. A disturbing shift in policy occurred during the Reagan years which could have profound consequences with respect to civil liberties. Whereas civil defense planning in the past had focused on disaster relief, the national security focus of the administration of Ronald Reagan meant implementing new ways to expand police powers in times of nuclear war, domestic unrest, and civil disorder.
Reagan was elected to the presidency. He installed Louis Giuffrida as head of Fema, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Giuffrida was an old cold warrior from Reagan's California days whose specialty was suppression of unrest and dissent. Giuffrida, North, and George Bush began to turn FEMA into an instrument of domestic anti-terrorism.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent. And with North and Poindexter and Casey, you had a group of people who saw Americans who disagree with them as the enemy.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster?
Mr. Chairman. I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was,
May I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
And tragically, the only member who got close was Jack Brooks, and he was stopped by the...
A national state of emergency can be declared by a concurrent resolution of both houses of Congress or by the President in the case of natural disasters, nuclear war, a massive mobilization in anticipation of an enemy attack on U.S. territory, or domestic civil unrest. Executive orders associated with FEMA that would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights have been on record for nearly 30 years and could be enacted at the stroke of a pen. The following executive orders allow FEMA to take control over all modes of transportation and control of highways and seaports. They are also able to take control and seize communications media. They are allowed to take over all electrical power, gas, petroleum, fuels, and minerals. They are allowed to seize all means of transportation, including personal cars, trucks, vehicles of any kind, total of all highways. You'll notice they can take over all food resources and farms. They're able to mobilize civilians into work brigades under government supervision. And they are allowed to take over all health, education, and welfare functions. They designate the Postmaster General to operate a national registration of all persons. They are able to take over airports and aircraft, including all commercial aircraft, as well as the Housing and Finance Authority is allowed to relocate communities, build new housing with public funds, designate areas to be abandoned, and establish new locations for populations. They're even allowed to take over all railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities. Specifies responsibility of Office of Emergency Planning and gives authorization to put all executive orders into effect in times of increased international tensions or economical and financial crisis. And they're also granted authority under the Department of Justice to force all plans out in the executive orders. And you can see they can operate penal and correctional institutions and advise and assist the President. They assign emergency preparedness functions to federal department agencies, consolidating 21 operative executive orders issued over a 15-year period.
Congress shall now vote for approval of H.R. 8791, the Homeland Terrorism Preparedness Bill. Said bill requests emergency response funding up to and including, I'm sorry, this section is classified, dollars to prepare for a national level terrorist attack and or attack from classified. Funding for first responder personnel and vehicles would be doubled if said attack leads to more than 80% of national population being affected by classified. This funding shall commence in conjunction with the first attack on classified or the first large-scale outbreak of classified, dependent upon which comes first. Civilian and military units shall be trained in containment and combat of classified, including irradiated classified with possibility of classified airborne, classified flesh-eating, classified, and or all of the above in such event as classified spewing, classified escape are released or otherwise become uncontrollable. Air Force units may also be directed to combat said classified due to their enormous size and otherworldly strengths. Should event occur in urban areas, Jesus, that's classified, far surpassing our darkest nightmares. Should casualties exceed classified body disposal actions, shall be halted and associated resources shall be reallocated to classified underground, classified protected birthing centers. A new Bill of Rights shall be drafted and approved by classified. Having now reviewed the bill, I ask you to please cast your votes.
Is Congressman Ron Paul. Hello, Congressman. How are you, sir?
Hello, Glenn. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. First of all, on the FEMA prison thing, I know we've been in contact with your office, and we would appreciate any help that you have. I want to make sure we're turning over every stone on anything, because there's a lot of crazy stuff that is being said about these things, and I appreciate you talking to us, and we'll be in touch with you again, because I want to make sure that we have everything that you might be concerned with as well. Will you help us on that, sir?
I don't think all the answers are in. You're concerned that there might be setting up these camps.
Yes.
Since 9/11, dealing with the Patriot Act and repealing the Posse Comitatus and the Insurrection Act, these are trends that are very, very bad, where personal liberties and civil liberties are not well protected. And FEMA is already very, very powerful, and they overrule when they go in on emergencies. So in some ways, they can accomplish what you might be thinking about setting up camps. And they don't necessarily have to have legislation, to do the things that we dread. But it's something that's certainly deserves a lot of attention.
Right, and I want to make it very clear. I'm not fearing these things are happening. I want to set the record straight.
The 502nd, another unit from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, is shown here arriving as peacekeepers in Somalia, wearing their UN blue berets and UN insignia. Shortly thereafter, this same unit, the 502nd, was in Arkansas practicing house-to-house searches and seizures in a joint UN training mission called Agile Provider in the spring of 1994. Agile Provider involved 44,000 UN troops, including troops from France and the Netherlands, training in the states of Georgia, North and South Carolina, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Yes, UN troops have been trained in this country in the past, but not in brigade strengths and not in domestic support house-to-house searches and seizures. Many of our congressmen deny that UN troops are being trained in this country at all, but as you can see in these clips from Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Germans were training here last spring.
Das ist die Baracke 1660, die da vom zweiten Zug hinschollen,
UN training has become so widespread that many of the newspapers around the country have had at least one such story. This official news release from the Navy High Command, Atlantcom, further confirms that UN troops were training in this country this past spring in forcible entries of homes using special operations tactics. News releases from around the country speak of law enforcement and military training together for so-called terrorist suppression involving attacks on civilian facilities. Did you know that 49 of our most famous landmarks have been given to the United Nations as supposed biospheres? Yet many of these supposed biospheres are located outside military facilities and are used for covert UN military special operations training areas. On the border between the U.S. and Canada, we see the UN flag flying between the U.S. and Canadian flags. Throughout cities in America, UN flags are popping up outside government buildings. But perhaps most disturbing was this letter received by New American Magazine detailing a survey given to Marines at 29 Palms Base. We confirmed this survey was given to Army Special Operations recruits. The survey asked troops whether they would swear to the following code. I am a United Nations fighting person. I serve in the forces which maintain world peace and every nation's way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. This survey also asked if these U.S. military men would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. Did you notice the federal tax agents dressed like military patrolling the roads during the Waco siege, or the black military helicopters at each of the Indy 500 races for the past several years? We found that these state facilities are being built in the middle of U.S. Army property, not just in Indiana, but other states, as people sent us pictures of such facilities in their states, such as this facility at Camp Pinckney in Brighton, Michigan. You see not only the black vans here, but curiously, there are reverse swastikas carved into each end of the roof. We also began to receive information about the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA, such as these pictures of a FEMA facility in Texas. FEMA operations are divided into 10 regions, as we were told in this letter from FEMA. The American public has been led to believe that FEMA is for disaster relief operations. Yet if we look at military manuals such as FM 4130, the U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Operations Manual, you'll find the details about who FEMA really is. The government doesn't want this information out because, as you can see, the manual says to destroy it by any means that will prevent its dissemination. The manual says that FEMA is the executive agency that serves as the point of contact for the USG for emergency management within the United States. Under Executive Order 12148 of July 20th, 1979, the President transferred all functions from the Civil Defense, Civil Preparedness agencies under the Department of Defense to FEMA. FEMA develops and implements overall concepts and policy guidance and directs activities for nationwide plans and preparedness for emergencies during peace and war. It also develops plans, systems, and capabilities for protection of the U.S. populace, government, and industry, and for stabilization of the economy in time of emergency. Again, we see from this military manual that FEMA is divided into 10 regions and is the command and control agency for all emergency planning. None of this sounds too sinister until you begin to find out what FEMA has done with 96% of their budget. FEMA has built prisons around the country, and they've also built underground facilities. It actually turns out that they are the key agency to implement a plan known as Operation Garden Plot, the plan to put American citizens in prison camps. Under Executive Order 12919, signed by Bill Clinton on June 3, 1993, presidential authority under a 1950s Defense Production Act was delegated to the Secretaries of Defense, Agriculture, Treasury, and Commerce to seize all civilian property for the government solely by declaring them necessary for national defense. It also gave the Director of FEMA the authority to implement FEMA plans during a national emergency. Most people don't realize that this country has been in a declared state of emergency since the Federal Emergency Act was enacted in 1933, which was the beginning of FEMA, and also gave presidents the authority to issue executive orders. Each president since then has issued an executive order declaring a state of national emergency. Bill Clinton has issued 3 such orders since he took office. Shown here is a FEMA facility in Denton, Texas, where you can see mile after mile of FEMA command and control trailers. These trailers are self-sustaining and contain electrical generators and communications equipment that can be moved out anywhere in the country to start a FEMA operations center. Several military manuals, such as these manuals, ranging from 1985 through 1994, speak of FEMA as the implementing agency for Operation Garden Plot, the plan to put American citizens in prison camps under military control. This 1994 Field Manual for Military Police speaks of Operation Garden Plot as a DoD civil disturbance plan that tells the military what they can and cannot do, and that they will operate under FEMA control. Several thousand U.S. troops are training in the U.S. this summer and fall, and if we look around us, we can see plenty of the signs and symptoms of a global takeover under the auspices of the United Nations taking place right here in our country. These trucks are Soviet trucks imported from eastern Germany, parked at a private facility in the DeSoto National Forest in Sautier, Mississippi, just outside Gulfport off Highway 59. A sign on the facility says Airmar. Airmar is privately owned, but the signs on fences around the facility say this is a U.S. Customs facility. Several acres of federal forest land was bulldozed to create this customs facility solely for Airmar. No one knows for sure what this facility really is, but one thing is certain, it's not what we're being told it is. And there are 750 Soviet chemical trucks sitting in Mississippi whose sole use is to spray chemicals and nerve gas in chemical warfare operations. What are they doing in Mississippi? What are they doing on U.S. soil? And why are they under the protection of the U.S. government if they are privately owned? Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia was quoted as saying he was certain the American public would welcome the Soviet troops as peacekeeping forces in the United States. Not only have these Soviet trucks been found in Mississippi, people recently photographed these two clearly marked Soviet vehicles in Texas. This train full of American-made tanks was one of 7 such trains that passed through Indianapolis en route to Fort Lewis, Washington in June. We were told that this was the 3rd Armored Division returning from Europe. Yet Fort Lewis has such a severe housing shortage that many military families are actually living in tents. Yet this whole division is being sent there. 3 other such trains passed through Indianapolis in early August, one heading to Fort Riley, Kansas, another to Alabama, and the 3rd to Fort Lewis, Washington. Are these tanks part of Operation Garden Plot, to be used to round us up for the slave labor camps, along with the black helicopters and federal law enforcement that look like active-duty military stationed in our roadways as they were in Waco? Welcome to the New World Order.
Joining us from Arizona, the story is military-industrial complex prepares mass graves for U.S. citizens. We're getting all these emails pouring in from around the country saying, hey, they've got these in my town, Abilene, and other areas. And it goes with all the plastic FEMA coffins, other reports that have been in the news, where they're in Indiana, Illinois. FEMA says we need to prepare for mass graves. Is it for bird flu? Are they getting ready for World War III? This is being set up at a military cemetery in Phoenix. Let's go ahead and bring the man up. He's been out there taking photos and interviewing people. We've been putting calls in all day to the head of the cemetery. He hasn't called us back yet, but let's go ahead and go to Shepard Ambulus. Shepard, thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. How's it going?
Good. Tell us how you first discovered this, what's going on there. We have the photos. We have the satellite photos. I mean, you caught them doing this deep into their operation. There's a bunch of other areas where they've buried these crypts.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my friend alerted me to this originally, and, he said, what do you make of this? And I told him right away, because, I'm familiar with the FEMA coffins, and also some concrete caskets in a cemetery in L.A., and basically we went over and investigated it, took some pictures. One of my friends ended up interviewing a truck driver that was part of the operation, and basically gathered from the truck driver after about 10 minutes of the truck driver kind of beating around the bush. He basically said, look, these are for U.S. military, and 4 caskets fit in each one of these burial vaults. And basically went on to say, he got paid an awful lot of money to do his job, and sounds like a little bit of a, bribe to me or something.
And I just want to explain to people, then we're going to pick your brain on this. Explain to folks, this is the way regular military cemeteries work. It's one coffin, one crypt, and then there's space around the graves. they're going in, digging in 10 feet, as you said. We have the photos of this, putting in all of these crypts right up against each other. So I guess this wouldn't be properly marked graves. This is not the way it's ever been done. And they're doing it at night, which is very, very secretive. And then it dovetails in with the FEMA plastic coffins all over the country, Georgia and other areas, confirmed from the company that sold it to FEMA. Centers for Disease Control massing these. I mean, this is like 28 days later or something. This is very frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is, I kind of got this to you guys a little bit late. I've been working on this, but absolutely, they've been working on it over the last 30-plus days. It's a large-scale operation. I mean, semi-trucks literally every morning, you know, they start during, it's still dark, you know, they start real early. Then they start lining up, literally bringing these things in and just unloading them all day long, stacking them in tightly together. The interesting observation I made was they actually went ahead and laid down what's called ABC or some kind of rock that's, you know, probably 1 to 2 inches in diameter on the whole base of this thing. And now I've done a little bit of research about mass graves in Germany and whatnot, and I thought this could be, you know, aid with the decomposition process, but basically is what I'm thinking is it's some kind of drainage system or bedding that was installed.
Yeah, stay there. And I wasn't criticizing you for getting into the project late. I meant you discovered it late in the project, so they're burying them empty and putting a layer over it. You can see that from the aerial photographs. It's just huge complex and just unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. We'll continue with our eyewitness citizen reporter in 70 seconds when we start hour number 4. Jason Douglas just got news. He just talked to Ellis, the director of the Phoenix Department of Veterans Affairs National Memorial Cemetery in Phoenix, Arizona, 225-acre facility. Now, we know how they dig the graves. They're single-person crypts. They put the coffins in. There's space. You've seen Arlington Cemetery. You've seen it all. These are being buried. They never do that. Beforehand, covered up, and they're then setting them right next to each other. And these are crypts that can hold 4 coffins, or if you don't put people in coffins, it can hold even more than that. And our guest has done the math on this, Shepard Ambulus. And Shepard, we're going to go to you in just a moment, but I wanted to go to Jason Douglas, who does graphics, video editing, and producing for the Jason Burma Show and this show, along with Rob Dew, doing a great job. You finally got a hold of the director of the National Memorial Cemetery there in Phoenix. What did he tell you?
Well, he basically just said that this is completely commonplace, that they dig these graves ahead of time. They only get 2 days' notice once they know who's going to be interred. But I asked him if he could comment on who was actually going to be put into those graves or if he knew anything about the content of the graves. He wouldn't make a comment on that. He seemed like he had this pretty well-prepared speech. He didn't...
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just normal to have 4,000 graves, just what we can count on the surface. That's supposedly normal.
Right, supposedly normal. He said everything was above board.
I mean, supposedly only 4,500 troops have died in Iraq. So, I mean, suddenly they just need all these graves.
Yeah.
And just one cemetery, and we're getting reports they're building these at military cemeteries everywhere.
Right. Yeah, we've also had reports in Abilene, Texas. We're asking people to write in online. I've posted some videos and shown the pictures online. People are making comments, so hopefully we'll get some more reports of other mass graves.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Bickle, and I want to introduce you to what we call the killing fields. Here's one of FEMA's projects. 500,000 body casket liners on the railroad tracks. The second location of 2, this one here in Covington, Georgia, at my back doorstep. 1.5 million on the same track line. Right here follows all the way down to Madison and into Atlanta. FEMA controls and has made a purchase order in 2005 and contracted for 5 million caskets or body liners. They're sold by a company called Polyguard. Vantage Corp actually, I believe, is holding the merchandise for the company Polyguard, who actually manufactures. It's a Hercules-style series. Airtight bio hazard container This is, as I say, the second of three locations. This being the second that I know of, the first one in Madison. And overall, I think the order is about 500,000 to 2 million caskets total that we have seen, which there may be more undisclosed locations that we don't know. We're definitely looking into it. Like I said, if you want to see the company that manufactures, it's Polyguard. You can find them online, and this is the Hercules style series. And if you go to spend.org or spend.org, you'll see the budget and the order where FEMA ordered these. And this will probably be one of the first in a number of series that will run on the Federal Emergency Management Agency and what they're currently programmed and doing. So I just want to open up the eyes to the rest of the community and let them know that the caskets are here, and again, this is Covington, Georgia. And
but I have found, and they are covering a lot of stuff up. It looks like they put these vaults in the ground, and they're covering this stuff up. So we're going to move on over here. Better photo to a better video of the vault. There's your vault. This is quite interesting to say the least.
PS4 News has learned if mass arrests happen at the Democratic National Convention, those taken into custody will be jailed in a warehouse owned by the city of Denver.
Our investigator Rick Salinger discovered the location and got inside just today for an exclusive look. Protesters, Rick, not happy with the setup.
As you would imagine, Jim and Karen, they are not. This is a building filled with metal holding cells. We showed up at the facility unannounced today. The doors were wide open, and we managed to shoot for several minutes until a Denver sheriff's captain asked us to leave.
The newly created lockup is inside a warehouse on the northeast side of Denver. Inside are dozens of metal cages. They are made out of chain-link fence material and are topped by rolls of barbed wire. Our presence here was not authorized nor welcomed.
And this is a secure environment, a secured area, and so we're concerned about how that's going to be utilized by people who potentially are trying to be disruptive.
Let them go! Let them go! In past conventions, mass arrests have taken place. With Denver's jails already overflowing, new space had to be created and officers trained.
Each of these fenced-in areas is about 5 yards by 5 yards. There's a lock on the door. How long those arrested will be kept here is not known.
A sign on the wall reads, "Warning, electric stun devices used in this facility." We showed our video to Adam Young and Zoe Williams, leaders of groups that plan to demonstrate during the convention.
Very bare bones and also very reminiscent of a political prisoner camp or a concentration camp.
I mean, that's how you treat cattle, and then you showed the thing where it said, you know, stun guns in use, and just changed the word gun for bolt, and I mean, it's a meat processing plant.
The Sheriff's Department will not discuss the facility at this time.
We want to make sure that we've got our game plan set. We want to make sure that the entire procedure is laid out. All the personnel know what they're supposed to do.
The plans were to keep this place a secret, at least for now.
The American Civil Liberties Union says it will ask the city of Denver how prisoners will get access to food and water, bathrooms, telephones, plus medical care, and if there will be a place to meet with attorneys. And the protesters, Jim and Karen, have already given this place a name. They're calling it Gitmo on the Platte.
All right. Thanks.
These are actual government documents of the receiving station where you would be processed initially into the FEMA camps. As you can see, they have a place for showering, medical and immunization, disinfection, clothing issue, holding cells, where the forms are prepared, photographs taken, etc., property impounded, records reviewed, and you can see the outer fence area of this FEMA camp. And next you have a receiving station also with officers' quarters. You can see for the enlisted people, the non-commissioned officers, females, and officers. Down at the bottom you've got the screening area where property records, personal hygiene, the photographs would be taken, and then you would have a prisoner of war holding cell to the bottom right of the screen, and fenced areas with towers, as you can see, guard towers. And then lastly, the detention facilities here. These are all official documents in HR 645 showing where the prisoners would be housed and an exercise area. So you can see these are official documents on how they would and will and have built these FEMA camps. So these are official documents. I also wanted you to see the Fusion Center, Ohio's Fusion Center. It is actually called the Strategic Analysis and Information Center, Columbus, Ohio. As you can see, zip code is 43223 on West Broad Street. This is an intelligence gathering apparatus for the Department of Homeland Security. Zooming in, you can recognize the street if you've ever driven up or down this street. And if you look over here to the left as I'm scrolling, you will see the actual building. Incidentally, a friend and I drove up here one morning after we got off work and drove around into the parking area and looked, and there were no signs whatsoever of any strategic analysis and information center. Nothing to show that this is a Department of Homeland Security area. Actually, this is the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and the Department of Transportation is what it says. But you would never know that this is an information gathering apparatus for the Homeland Security. So just wanted you to see that as well.
my whole film. Basically, you've got to understand that this is an agenda by the global elite to take over the world, simply put. And the FEMA camps are a byproduct of it. It's a result for the dissidents who are not going to go with this program. You've seen that the Department of Homeland Security labels Iraqi troops as coming home as possible, terrorists, low-level terrorists. On the news, the Department of Homeland Security had several different articles where they've said that, that people who believe in the Constitution, as you saw in part of the film, or go around with bumper stickers on their cars saying down with the New World Order, or audit the Federal Reserve, such as my shirt says here, it could be possible terrorists. You have Obama now bringing about this new civilian force, and here's the Department of Defense directive number 1404.10, January 23rd, 2009, DoD Civilian Expeditionary Workforce, basically hiring people to become civilian police for the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. And I could read this stuff. My film could be 5 or 6 hours long. One thing I did want to read in here lastly was from the book The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is about the Federal Reserve System, how it was created and how it's corrupt. It's not a federal system. I suggest you get this book sometime and read it. But on page 98, it talks about financing, corruption, and despotism. And it says, nowhere is the pattern more blatant than in Africa, talking about FEMA camps. One of the things it says in Tanzania, it's notorious for villagization programs in which the army has driven the peasants from their land, burned their huts, loaded them like cattle into trucks for relocation into government villages. Purpose is to eliminate opposition by bringing everyone into compounds where they can be watched and controlled. Meanwhile, the economy staggers, farms have gone to weeds, and hunger is commonplace. Yet Tanzania has received more aid per capita from the World Bank than any other nation. They get it from the IMF, the World Bank, they give them all this money, but the government's using it to break the economy there, to break the civilization there. In Uganda, government security forces have engaged in mass detentions, torture, and killing of prisoners. The same is true under the terrorist government of Zimbabwe. And the last portion of my film that you've seen was, which is a matter of fact right here, the last portion of that film is an Australian detention facility, and you saw the torture and the deprivation that's going on there. A man even having his mouth stitched shut. This is all coming, guys, and if you sit around and you don't do anything about it, then you can't blame anybody when you're sitting in the FEMA camps. So you have to get involved. You have to call congressmen, you have to call your representatives, you have to go online. I suggest that you go to jbs.org, infowars.com, check out Israeli National News Network, check out a lot of the internet networks, because that's where you'll find a lot more of the information. The media that you watch on TV is watered down. It's owned by basically the CFR through Rupert Murdoch and other members of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a global think tank group that works subvertly to take away the Republic of the United States. And so just, if you don't do anything about it, it's going to be your own fault. As for me, I'm going to continue to inform you, and hopefully I'll be able to do so. Zimbabwe is a classic case. It says, after its independence, the leftist government nationalized, which means confiscated, many of the farms previously owned by the white settlers, and most desirable of the lands became occupied by the government's senior ruling party officials. The rest were turned into state-run collectives. They were such miserable failures that the workers on these farmlands were themselves begging for food. Now, that's exactly what's happened here in the United States, too. Everything's being nationalized, car companies, banks. You see now that they're giving the Federal Reserve System more power to regulate all aspects of your life. And H.R. 2454 has now been passed in the other day, which basically is a carbon tax, which is going to break the pocketbooks of all the American people. So friends, all I can say is study, get online, get involved, get action-oriented, call your officials, and prepare, because Gerald Celente, a forecaster, has also said by 2012 it's going to be total chaos, economic collapse, if not war. You know, Korea's over there rattling sabers, Iran has got turmoil, CIA's all over the place causing all kinds of havoc, but it's coming. I hope this will prepare you, and may the Almighty be with you.
Take two, Q Howard. I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman, because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. My life has value.
Dude, I hate...
There is something that has gone and is legitimately lost, and that is your freedom as an individual human being to be free, to do your own thinking, to be your own person. That is lost. You have been taken over and you don't even know it. And you said that the reason why? Cause and effect. The people who are behind the scenes of government in this country, their greatest enemy is you.
Don't know what you're doing. Don't know what you're thinking. Stick to watching TV. Then they'll just ignore you, leave you alone.
I think at one time or another we've all questioned as to whether all that we see and are experiencing in our world has some sort of a rational plan behind it. Because we understand now that both the Republican and the Democratic Party in our country are basically run by the same people. The same money finances both sides. We now know, of course, through the work of many historians who have spent their life working on research that show us that both sides of world conflicts have always been financed by the same people.